This is just a quick follow-up video to my initial one where I showed you how to set up the pivot table for using the battery habitat key data to inform survey design. I've shared a couple of graphics about the relevant survey effort in the different times of year. So if you remember, we talked about going through and selecting your tree, and I used the example of an oak tree with a woodpecker hole in semi-natural woodland, and how we're likely to get quite a few results returned from that. So I'm just going to open that back up here. As you can see, we had results for spring flux, pregnancy, nursery, mating, but not for autumn flux and winter. The survey effort recommended by the battery habitat key depends a bit on species, but it also depends on the type of roost that you're dealing with, whether you're dealing with individuals or whether you're dealing with a maternity roost. And so I thought I'd just delve into that a bit further. So here we can see in the pregnancy period, bear in mind this is a time frame. It's not saying that these are pregnant bats. This is the time of year. So pregnancy is May to June, and then nursery, or is it May to, yeah, nursery is July to August. And so you might read this and kind of be forgiven if you looked at it and said, okay, well, these are records of maternity roost of Bechsteins, Natterers, Nocturals, and brown long-eared, for example. However, that's not what this is saying. This is actually saying they have been recorded at this time of year. In order to determine whether these are maternity roosts, we need to go a little bit further. So there's a couple of ways we can do that. We can either go back to the original records on this sheet here. So I'm just going to have a look at one of these, for example. So we had Quercus roba in woodland, broadleaf, semi-natural, in a woodpecker hole, and we're looking at Bechsteins, Natterers, Nocturals, and brown long-eared, basically. So I can filter the main sheet this way. So if I scroll all the way back up to the top, actually I don't need to get to the top there, we are looking for just oak, so we can deselect anything that's not an oak. That's a good place to start. So we're just going to do roba there. What else did we have? We had habitat type. So under phase 1 habitat type, we can select anything that wasn't. Oh, why can't I see that? Is that a top one, isn't it? I think that's right. Yeah, broadleaf, semi-natural, yes. And then we had woodpecker hole as well, didn't we? So PRF type. PRF type there. And we had woodpecker hole. So deselect anything that's not a woodpecker hole. And then if we look at these, we may have some null results in there. Scroll across. Yeah, so you can see there's a few NAs in there. We can get rid of those as well. Actually select all and just deselect that. So these are the records that then populated that pivot table. So if you remember, it was Bechsteins, Natterers, Nocturnal, and I think there's some brown long-eared down here as well. So we can do it this way and then just scroll across almost to the end of the sheet, and we can see the ones that have more than one bat, I guess, or it's very difficult to provide a threshold for maternity roosts, but we can see here, for example, this one of 58. If we scroll all the way back, that is Bechstein's bat. So we could probably be reasonably confident that's a maternity roost. As with all of these as well, if we have a look on the left-hand side, what species are these? They're Bechsteins again. Yeah, okay. So you can do it this way of kind of going a bit back and forth and basing it on numbers. It's a little bit labor intensive that way. So the alternative option you have is you can just add it into the pivot table here. So instead of going through the original database, we just go to here and we are looking for minimum number of bats. And assuming that ends up in the right place, which it hasn't, it's ended up at the top here, which is a pain. So we're going to put that down at the bottom. Minimum number of bats. Here we go. Right. So now what we can see in a much more concise fashion that we're only interested in the nursery and pregnancy period. So we can see, okay, we've had lots of Bechstein's bats in a woodpecker hole in semi-natural woodland. Who knew, right? Of course they're going to like it. So that would tell us that that's maternity roost we need to consider for Bechstein's, but maybe brown long-eared as well. Could make the argument there. I think for Nocturals and Natterers, we would just consider those as individual records. If we're then looking at pregnancy period, see a kind of similar results, which definitely for Becksteins and a bit more questionable when it comes to nocturals and natterers. So yeah, there's just a bit more guidance to how we can kind of use this really. And if you refer to the graphics, it breaks down in much more detail about the number of surveys that are required in each of those time frames, depending on what these results, what the records tell us, essentially the records that have already been recorded. So in this instance, yes, we've got likely maternity roost of Beckstein, so therefore we would need quite a high level of survey effort. However, if we looked at all of these results and we had fairly small number of bats or just individual bats, then we would just focus on the individual survey recommendations from the battery habitat key rather than the survey effort recommended for maternity roost. Hope that useful. Cheers.